Good afternoon. My name's Elliot Wong Toy, and I'm a PhD student from the Department of Statistics. On behalf of the organizing committee, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to another What Matters to Me and Why talk here at UC Irvine. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. By entering the room, you've consented to being filmed. If you would not like to appear on the video, please move to the back of the room. Also, after the talk, we'll be having a question and answer session. Please wait until you receive a microphone before asking your question so that those on Zoom can also hear. And finally, as many of you already started, you're welcome to eat during the talk or to take your lunch and eat after. So as staff, faculty, and students, we spend much of our time dealing with exams, homework, lectures, budgets, personnel, and other topics, generally just doing things that keep the university running. What matters to me and why is a chance to take a few minutes every month to take a break from these tasks. Every month we have the opportunity to hear from someone who shapes UC Irvine through their daily activities. They give a short, informal talk followed by ample time for questions and discussion. There's no prescribed topic. Speakers are asked simply to answer the question, what matters to you and why, authentically and frankly, and take that wherever it goes. The series provides a forum for speakers to talk about values, beliefs, and motivations, and perhaps to share how these have been shaped by their personal experiences, including both the highs and lows along the way. The hope is to strengthen bonds between faculty, students, and staff who teach, learn, and work here, and celebrate both the diversity of our community and the commonalities that bind us together. One thing that's really nice about What Matters to Me and Why is that it brings people together from across the campus. That's including undergrads, grad students, staff, and faculty. So it is our tradition to give people a chance to introduce themselves to each other. Those of you here in the room, why don't you take a moment to say hi, and those of you on Zoom, why don't you introduce yourselves over the chat.
So my name's Claire Yu. I am in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. It's my pleasure to welcome you, and especially to welcome our speaker today, who is Professor Donald Saari, who is a distinguished professor of economics and of mathematics, as well as the former director of the Institute for Mathematical Behavioral Sciences. Don grew up in a Finnish-American copper mining community in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the son of two labor organizers there. And although he was accepted as a young man to an Ivy League university, his family could not afford to send him to such a prestigious school, so he went to a local university and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in mathematics from Michigan Technological University in 1962. He then went on to get a PhD in mathematics at Purdue, and after a short stint at Yale in the astronomy department as a postdoc, he spent the next 32 years at Northwestern University, where he served as chair of the mathematics department, chair of the university senate, and was the inaugural Pankow professor of mathematics. We were fortunate enough to have him join the faculty at UCI in 2000. And as I said, he was a distinguished professor of economics and math and director of the Institute for Mathematical Behavioral Sciences. His research interests are quite broad and varied. They vary from celestial mechanics and sort of rotation of various bodies, and even arguing with some of the so-called evidences for dark matter, to mathematical concerns about economics, arbitrage and hedging, as well as troubling properties of voting procedures and what's the best way to vote, and apparently we're not doing it, and other issues concerned with behavioral sciences. He's an elected member of the National Academy of Sciences, of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, as well as a foreign member of the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters and the Russian Academy of Sciences. So please join me in welcoming Professor Saari.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also for you being here. A beautiful day out there. Of course, you might get blown away with all that wind out there. But so the first question I think some of you might have is that last name, Saari. Where is he from? Is his ancestry that of India or Saudi Arabia? Nah, it's that of Finnish. Now, you know where Finland is. It's that far north country that just joined NATO, and there's an 830-mile border with Russia, next door neighbor to Sweden and Norway. And if you have the chance to go there, go. You'll see all kinds of lakes all over the place. And in the lakes, you'll see little islands. And Saari is the Finnish word for island. So Saari is about as common of a name in Finland as you would expect Smith to be in England. So also giving some backgrounds about what's important to me and why. Let me tell you about an experience that happened when I was a graduate student. I met and fell in love with a beautiful, blonde Finnish-American from Vermont. It took a while, but I finally got enough courage, and I said, would you marry me? And her response was, what? And be sorry for the rest of my life? Then she gave me a big kiss, and we were married for, had 53 beautiful years until she died 5 years ago. So what's important to me? Probably of most importance, family, relationships. But you don't want to hear about that. You want to know what's important to me with respect to my research, with respect to my profession. There's two things: pay forward, curiosity. They sound different, but they're not. They're tied together. And what ties them together is the word WGAD. W-G-A-D. Don't know what it means, huh? Well, it's a word I invented. Each letter stands for a different word. W-G-A-D. Who gives a... I'll use darn for this lecture. So let's get into where some of these things crop up. Pay forward. If I'm paying forward, I must be paying somebody or thanking somebody by paying forward. And I sure did. Now, you can start off with the following. I was born and grew up in the state of Michigan. If you hear that somebody's from Michigan, it's fair to ask them, are you from the left hand or the right hand? See, Michigan consists of two peninsulas that jut out into the Great Lakes. And each of them have a thumb. So the right hand is Lower Michigan. Right here is Lake Huron. Here's Lake Michigan. Here's Detroit. Here's Ann Arbor. Here's Lansing. And the farther north you go, cities become small cities and towns and villages. And you're giving up the population size and gaining beautiful miles of forest and sightings of deer and bear. Then you get to the Straits of Mackinac, and that gets you to the left hand. That's the upper peninsula of Michigan. Here's Lake Michigan, and here's Lake Superior. And as you farther north you go, wow, the population goes down. Let me tell you how much the population goes down. The city of Irvine has a certain number of people. There are thousands more people in the city of Irvine than there is in the whole upper peninsula of Michigan. And I grew up here on the thumb, sticking out in Lake Superior, right at the base of the thumbnail. It would be so cold in the wintertime that it was not unusual to see people put on a lot of sweaters and down coats, jump in the car and drive south to somewhere warm, like Green Bay, Wisconsin, or Minneapolis, Minnesota. So the story which I'm telling you about that, it played an important part of what's important to me and why. You see, I was in a very isolated, remote area. Oh, as a kid, it was beautiful. You could go camping, you could go hiking, you could go swimming, you could go snow skiing and water skiing and on and on. But we didn't have available, at least then, what you can get in places like Irvine. We had a poorly stocked rather than a well-stocked library. We didn't have museums. We didn't have regular concerts. We didn't have any of those things. What we did have is a large number of understanding people. And it's because of these understanding people that I feel a pleasure of paying forward. Let's start with, of great importance, my parents. Dinner time was family time. We would get together, my parents, and they would talk about current events, politics, what they did during the day, etc. And rather than having me sit there and being a good little boy, they had me, what do you think of this? They had me talking about what I did. And they didn't cheat, and a lot of it might have been gibberish. But they took it seriously. And so at a very young age, I got a sense of confidence. Maybe there's something I can say. Who else influenced me? Well, it's pretty clear, isn't it? Teachers along the way that I had, etc. For example, I'll tell you about my 7th grade shop teacher. Shop teacher. Yeah, it was a mandatory course when I grew up there. Mandatory because, look, I was born at the tail end of the Great Depression and almost a couple of years before World War II. Highly remote area. You have something wrong with the plumbing or with the electricity, you want to build a garage, you did it. You couldn't hire someone in. And so the shop teachers would give us all of the instructions and all the tools and all the information on how to do all of that. And what I learned in that class still helps me a lot even today. But the more important lesson that my shop teacher, Joe Garrity, gave was not that. He would come into class and say, and give a question, what's this? And you know how students behave in high school, grade school, universities. They come out with a barrage of answers, waiting for the instructor to say, that was the correct one. Yes, that's very good. Not for Joe Garrity. He gave an answer. You really believe that's true? If you say no, he said, why did you raise it then? If you say, I think so. Why? Wogat. Why? Who gives a darn about that answer? Why? And so from Joe Garrity, he emphasized the importance of the Wogat statement, but he also underscored the importance of intellectual honesty. That what you say, you better believe. And more than believe, you better understand why you believe it. Beautiful, beautiful lesson. And I could go on, giving you other examples of who influenced me in different ways. But let's just stay with those two. Now, how do you pay forward? Well, see, as a professor, you have many, many opportunities. And they start with the new class you have each term. So, what am I going to pay forward? Well, I had to do a little thinking about what are the problems of students going in that new class. Each and every one of you, I bet each and every one of you have been in a class in high school or in college, and you said, what the hell am I doing here? Who gives a darn? Wogad. And, oh, is it too late to drop? Okay. So, the trouble is you don't see the relevance of the course with respect to what you're doing, want to do. So what I would do is, in the classes, I would start off by saying the most important question you can ask in this class is Wogad. Once I got that question, I would then give an answer then, if I could, or time management of what's being presented. I might give one, but it might be the beginning of the next lecture. But I would answer that question and take it seriously and answer it. But I reserve the right to Wogad question of anyone who's in the audience, of the students. A couple hundred students. I'm walking up and down the aisle, and then I say, oh, what's your major? Oh, political science. See that mathematical equation up there? Wogad. Who cares? What is it of importance for you? First couple times I do this, I hear them mumbling and not sure what they're going to say. And then what happens is I enlist help from other people to try to understand why what they're learning has relevance for what they want to do. What happened then is that the students began to realize, oh, he's going to call on me next. So they started thinking about the relevance of what's being taught with respect to what they want to do. I didn't tell them the relevance of the course. By the simple exercise, they discovered the relevance of the course. They discovered why it was important. Was it successful? Yeah, to a sense. For example, I had a couple of professors from the anthropology department there at Northwestern. And they came in with this puzzle, this problem that they were trying to resolve. They asked, can we use this equation? And I thought about it for a while. I said, yeah, that's nice. I said, how did you discover that? Oh, we didn't discover it. A freshman in your calculus class told us that might be the way to handle it. So, yeah, by understanding the relevance, it goes and moves across. But there's another part of being an instructor in a course. You know, each and every course we have, you can simplify it and say it's down to two things. One is the concept, and then we spend most of our time talking about how are we going to justify, or details, how do we explain that concept? I decided to go the other direction, that the concept is far more important than the details. The details you can learn and pick up as you go along. But the concept, you better have that if you want to apply it. So I would go into the class, and after telling them what I get, I would then try to tell them that if you want to understand the concepts, you got to tell stories. Why? Details don't transfer. You know, the integral of the arctangent of, you're not going to be able to transfer that to another area. You're going to get a glazed look if I'll try it here, will you? And you'll, oh, God. But the question is that concepts transfer from one discipline to another. And so the idea is that if you have to be able to tell a story to the person in front of you or behind you, what you've been doing, and if you can't do so, you haven't grasped the concept yet. So how would I teach that? How would I do that? Well, I had to teach them how to tell stories. Without telling them, I'm trying to teach them how to tell stories. So I would go in, for example, maybe with a roll of toilet paper that's sculptured on the top, and after the bad joke of, well, this might be a crappy lecture, I then go on and ask the people, how do you find the volume of this? I don't know. Well, I walk up and down the aisle, and I give the roll to them, and they'd come up with something, and I'd say, what do you think? Do you think that's a correct answer? Maybe not. Finally, someone's going to say the following. If I want to find the volume of this, I have to reduce it down to the volume of a large number of things that I do know. So okay, when we take that, each take one of the piece of the toilet paper, and get up to the end and tear it off. And what do I have? Is I have a rectangle. A rectangular box. And I know what the volume of the rectangular box is. I remember from 6th grade where we had the circumference, that's the bottom of that sheet of paper, 2 pi r. And from how you sculptured it, I can figure out exactly what's the height. And the thickness is 2 ply. And so you know the volume of that sheet of paper, that rectangle. And so you say, can we add them all up? And that's exactly an important formula in calculus. So I would ask the students then to write down that formula. And they would get it right. And I read it on the board. Now, there are some negative consequences of that too. Yeah. Somehow or another around exam time, there was some big mystery. In the dorms, people were trying to understand why were rolls of toilet paper missing. But they're also, this is exam week. And built into every single student's head is a little valve. When you finish the final exam, you walk through, and as you go through the door, that valve goes, and you're whoosh, and everything you learn starts flowing out. Unless what you learned is yours, not what I told you, but yours, how to find that formula. And with that being the case, you will remember it. As an example, we have an alumni weekend. I would run into students that were in my class 15 years ago. And I would ask, Oh yeah, after we have her chatting about our losing football season, and about oh yeah, it was horrible. And I would then ask him, hey, how would you find the volume of revolution? And can you tell me what the formula is? They say, well, let me think. Do you want the apple method or the toilet paper method? And they could give me the answer. And so it was absolutely, it's actually a delight when you're trying to get rid of some of these problems being in front of the classroom. Now, how am I going to transfer that to my second issue, creativity? I said they go hand in hand. Now, let me explain. But first, let me explain that creativity has been one of my joys and one of my problems my whole life. An example is, when I was 10 years old, my mother found a horrible odor coming out of our back porch. It was a hot summer day. She went there, and there was a cardboard box, and she picked it up, and there was a dead crow ratting away, stunky as you can imagine. So when I got home from whatever activity I had, maybe swimming or something like that, she says, do you know anything about a crow? I said, oh yeah. When I was out in the woods, I found this dead crow. And I want to understand how a crow flies, what part of it, about the wings, the strength. And I want to know what I need to know to be a taxidermist. She says, well, that might be fine, she says, as she's holding her nose. She says, that might be fine, but you do know that if you bring in a dead animal and in the hot weather, it's going to rot. It's going to stink. I said, yes, I know that. But you see, when I came home, I was going to put it in the refrigerator, but it was full with too much food. Could you imagine what my mother would have said if she opened the refrigerator? See this damn big dead crow. Fortunately, I didn't do that. But, let's get to creativity. I'm giving a rough estimate. I'd say probably no more than 99% of the faculty here view creativity as important. Why? Our research is to try to find answers to the unknown. And I can't go to the book and say, what's the answer to this? I have to find it out on my own. So here's what I use in the classroom. I use the idea of telling stories to find what is the true concept behind what I am trying to understand. That means I have to tell simple stories. And who is the victim of all these stories? My poor wife. She doesn't know mathematics, and she doesn't particularly care for mathematics. She's dead now, but it wasn't because of mathematics. But what she does is, I'd have to tell a story that she'd understand about what I'm doing in my research. And usually the first iterate, she'd look at me and says, what in the world are you talking about? I don't understand anything. That meant I didn't really grasp the concept well enough because I couldn't tell a story to transfer it to another discipline. And so maybe I'd come back a couple of days later and I said, well, let me give you this story. And finally, when she understood the story well enough that she could ask very good questions, I decided, yeah, maybe finally got the concept. And once I had the concept, the details would follow. I knew exactly what to look for. Let me give you a couple of examples. I'm a mathematician, and as we have another mathematician back there, a couple of them, my interest is in dynamics, how things move. So we have this story about the universe evolving. Well, wait a minute, don't we have gravity? Newton said we do. Why doesn't it pull it down? How can it spread out? Does gravity allow it to go helter-skelter out there? Or is there some beautiful situation that crops up? So, what am I going to do? Well, I got to tell my wife a story about what's puzzling me. And I'm not going to tell her, well, Newton's inverse square force law. She'll say, excuse me, I need some coffee. But the inverse square force law and magnets and love are very similar. The closer you get together, the stronger. Okay? So I would give her examples with magnets, where we would try to figure out why do they stay and how do they split up. And from that, I then understood what is the mathematics I need to try to answer these questions. And so I developed them. And what did I find? I found a lot of bodies, stars, had to hang around each other. Let's call that a galaxy. And then we have galaxies that are separating from each other, but they're hanging around each other. What is that? Let's call that a cluster of galaxies. So, and then what happens is that the clusters of galaxies, maybe not now, but in the limit, they start heading towards beautiful configurations. And maybe an equilateral triangle or something else of that type. And then there's the clusters of galaxies separate from each other at another rate. And this is almost precisely the story we learn from astronomy. But it is a consequence of Newton's equations of motion. This works for any number of bodies. As you're well aware, we normally have the 2-body or 3-body problem. This works for the 10 trillion body problem. The same story. Now, another area, and let me tell you, this area is full of intriguing ideas, and that's the social sciences. Right, Willie? And in the social sciences, I'll give you 2 stories in there. The first one is at Northwestern. Some advanced graduate students in economics came over, and they're looking at this new development in economics, theoretical economics, to understand supply and demand of everything else. And they asked if I would sit in and help them with the mathematics. I said, sure, why not? And then I got exposed to mathematics, of issues of astronomy. Of economics. Invisible hand story. Well, you all had the little economics. You know the story, that if the demand is high and the supply is low, the prices are going to go up. If the supply is high and the demand is low, the prices are going to go down. So that what people want then, create a dynamic of the prices. And Adam Smith said it's going to go bam to an equilibrium. Is it? That story is pretty true if you have a one commodity world, but boy, look at Amazon. We don't have a one commodity out there. We got a lot of them. In fact, looking at Amazon, what we do is we discover there are, I look at this, I want to buy this. It's too expensive. So what do? I look down that list in Amazon and say, I can buy that substitute. So if we have substitutes, what does that mean? It means that it's going to complicate this supply and demand story. And building on the work of Sonnenschein, Mantell, and Debreu, by the way, got a Nobel Prize in this area, in economics, I started trying to understand what's going on with the story I just got through telling you. Substitutes and people's preferences. And I was able to show that you give me, I don't know, maybe a 60 commodities in an environment, and you tell me how wild you want it to be. I mean, absolutely wild. Maybe there's an equilibrium and everything's going away from it. You just come up with the most pathological story you can think of. And I can show that it exists. And not only that, but if I take a commodity and I drop it, maybe it's a funny smelling cigarette, and we decide we can't have that anymore. Well, the sub-economy should be exactly what the big economy was, isn't it? I showed, no. They can be as different as you would like. So this meant what? This meant that the story which we tell in economics, it may be true, but it's not necessarily true. You can't justify it. We're just the assumptions we're making now. So this meant I had to try to find what are missing assumptions. And some of the missing assumptions that we have, the economists are really working on it, and that's marginal utility. Look, do I like one piece of pizza or 2 pieces of pizza? Which do I prefer? Well, Maybe I don't want to. One is enough. Maybe two is better. So there you're looking at how things are changing. And so my good friend Carl Simon, an economist from University of Michigan, he and I looked at that, and we framed in a mathematical way all possible ways you could look at the change of the commodities and everything else. And we showed, nope, that's not good enough. It's still not going to work. Well, if it does work, it says that there's something other than the basic assumptions that we're using in economics. What is it? I have no idea. I wish I did, but I have no idea. But it is clearly a puzzle. So let me go to my last example. Again, being with economists and political scientists and that, I heard that decision methods, the methods we use to make decisions, wow, can they have troubles? Yes, in fact, an important one, and you may have heard this phrase. In an election, once you have 3 or more candidates, no voting system is fair. It's a result of Kenneth Arrow. He was another Nobel laureate. And it really has changed a lot. It says that suppose I have a company and I have a lot of sub-companies and I farm out things. It says no matter how the decision is, be careful. I may get bad results. And if you don't believe it, take a look at Boeing today. And take a look at the 737 and the 777 last night and on and on. So how am I going to get this across? I have to tell a story to my wife. So I say, no voting system is fair. She says, you mean there's a lot of cheating? No. I mean, even if each and every person is honest and the people who are tallying the ballots are honest, no voting system is fair. That means that it does not reflect what we want it to reflect. Well, what's wrong with our plurality vote? Well, I had to think about that for a while. And then I said, well, look, suppose the election outcome is Anne, Barb, Connie, and Deanna. And suppose Deanna dropped out. Could the other switch and be Connie, Barb, Anne? If it could, we'd have to worry about the legitimacy of the voting system. And it can. Let me explain why. The plurality vote throws out so much information. It only counts who is your first place candidate, and your second, third, fourth, and fifth are all treated the same. Losers. We don't count them at all. So therefore, Anne, Barb, Connie, Deanna. If Deanna drops out, the people who had Deanna first place now have to go to the second place candidate. And maybe a lot of them had Connie second place, and some of them had Barb. And that could switch the whole thing around. So by telling the stories, it became clear that the difficulties in voting systems and decision systems is that they might not be using all of the available information. And by doing that, I was able to show that Arrow's theorem is not the way we interpreted it for the last 72 years. It does not mean what we thought for the last 72 years. But the situation is worse, much, much worse. Why? Almost all voting systems or decision methods are missing valued information about the voters, what they want. This meant, is there a voting system that doesn't bungle things up so badly? And there is. It was one that was put forth by Jean-Charles de Borda in 1770. The Borda count. And what is the Borda count? Well, the Borda count is like our 4-point grading system. You know, we've got the grades of A, B, C, D, E, F. So how many points do we give to an A? We give 4 points. Why? Well, there's 4 grades below it. And for a B, well, there's 3 grades below it. And a D, well, there's only 2 grades below it. So the Borda count is using essentially the same idea. What it does is if there's 10 candidates, your first candidate will get 9 points because there's 9 below it. The second one will get 8, etc. And it's easy to show that out of standard type voting methods, it's the only fair one. So the question then becomes, looking at other issues, and I have, and as I stated, the social sciences is full of issues to look at. But I also try to get across the idea, notice, in both paying forward and my handling of creativity, I use the same tools. Let's go back again to creativity. I'm trying to know the unknown. So if I ask WAGAD about what I hear on the news, or when I hear a lecture, or when I read the paper, or whatever, I don't believe that. It might be true, but I don't believe it. What you have is the tools are skepticism. And what should you be skeptical about? Definitely be skeptical about any simple solution. And so there we see WAGAD coming into play. And so the two things which tie everything together is WAGAD and telling stories to try to understand what is the true concept of what we're trying to understand. And with that, may I wish you all a happy WAGAD. And I thank you for your patience.
Great, thank you very much for that very enlightening approach. So I have a question. How did you get interested in math?
Well, I was always very good in math. But as you stated, that when I went to college, I could only afford to go to the local technical university. And so I decided I was going to go in chemistry. In chemistry, the material I loved, but you have to do labs. And I hated labs. Why did I hate the labs? I already knew what the answer was going to be. That was in the textbook. And so I would run all sorts of stupid experiments, cause a couple explosions here and there. And so I decided maybe it's time to look for another major. So I went into electrical engineering. In electrical engineering, you have labs. So I organized my group so we would go through the experiment. We would do a 3-hour experiment, 40 minutes. With success comes dangers. And the danger is, if you put 10,000 volts through something that can't handle it, you're going to have a big explosion. And after my second explosion, my instructor came up to me and he put his arm around my shoulder and he said, maybe you should go in a non-lab science. Why don't you try mathematics? So I went to the math department and I got in and I truly enjoyed it.
Great. Yes, so here, why don't we give you a microphone?
This is fascinating. How did you make the leap between being in the UP at a technical university and making it in the big time, as you've done?
Again, curiosity, the networks that I developed in college and issues of that type. Actually, when I was an undergraduate, I was going to go into the Peace Corps. And at that time, it was called the .4 Technical Corps. What an ugly name. But I wanted to go into the Peace Corps. But you have to apply to other options, and I applied. And I got into a couple schools. I got into Purdue and went down there, and I'll stay there a year or two. Fell in love with the math. And everything else happened after that. How did I get into celestial mechanics? I had no idea what it was. But the guy teaching the course was known as an excellent teacher. So I wanted to go watch him teach so I could figure out how. And I became in love with the field. And that's how I ended up in the Yale astronomy department with a math PhD on there. So a lot of it is just the way life pushes us one way or another.
Other questions? Do we have any on Zoom? There's one there.
Do you think that the United States will ever work into preferential voting, or
No, we are moving, and the range voting, you've heard of that, that was used in New York City, et cetera. It's better than plurality vote, but it's still lousy. Why is it lousy? You know what I'll tell you what range voting is. You vote. But when you vote, you write down all your preferences. Who's your first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, et cetera. So you vote. And when you vote, the first cut, you only look at the top-ranked candidate. If somebody is not a winner, getting over half the votes, you go down to the bottom-ranked candidate and throw them out. And then with their left, you keep using the plurality vote. Well, that sounds to me a little bit like, I know something is lousy, but I'm going to use it. Like, I know this material here is lousy, but I'm still going to use it in making a building or something else of that type. You see, at each stage, what is happens is they're using the plurality vote, aren't they? And again, you can have this bad information. You might have a candidate who is essentially second ranked across the board, obviously the voter's favorite. And at range voting, you'd be dropped right away. Same thing holds, the forms of that have been used for Best Picture in the Academy Awards. And people are wondering, how come these things didn't? Very easy. They're using a lousy voting system. But if you use the board account instead, you get rid of a lot of those problems. Okay,
Do you think you're going to convince anyone to?
Well, slowly. No, I don't know. I at least convinced the econ department. The math department doesn't. And so therefore in the math department, and I think you will agree to what I'm saying, is that you're looking for the candidates you want to hire. Anne, Barb, Connie, Deanna. And suppose Anne says, I can't come. I want to go to, I don't know, Texas Tech or something. So now so what do? We go right away to the second ranked candidate, huh? Barb. Oh, wait a minute. If these voters had 3 candidates, it might have been Anne might be the best, and it could flip. And so they're not necessarily going through the list and getting which candidate is the best. The one that avoids all of these problems is the board account. Not completely, but almost completely. And so it was used in some places. The trouble with it being adopted, it's a little too hard to explain and justify. It is used for determining the Heisman Trophy winner, for the collegiate rankings of football and basketball teams. And there the board account is used a lot, but in sports. But in politics, it's a little too hard for people to understand what's going on. So it'll be a long time before something like that comes through. Any other question?
Andrew Penner has one online.
Oh.
Thanks so much. This was super interesting. One of the things I think a lot about is the role of failure in creativity. And I think, you have told sort of a story that makes it seem like success was easy, right? But yet I spent some sort of, some struggles, right? And I was curious if you could talk, especially for, people like myself or some of our students who maybe everything doesn't come easily right away. Are there some successes and that didn't look like successes right away, where there was maybe a little bit of failure? You talked a lot about the role of your family. Does that sort of intersect with how you sort of think about failure along the way? Or just be curious to hear your reflection on it.
Well, 2 things. Number 1, you heard me embracing pay forward. You've got to be careful. I have been burnt a couple of times on that, but that's another long story. I'll maybe tell you privately, some of you. But when I'm trying to talk to my wife and explain to her the ideas, the story about what's going on, I have failure all the time, or many times. And that meant that the failures got me to rethink through what's going on. And with the failures getting me to rethink through, I'm getting to better and better understand what is the correct, the true concept hiding behind whatever it is that I'm trying to do research or teach. I hope that answers. Guess not. Mm-hmm.
Mentioned
You mentioned your research, you also mentioned your teaching.
A little louder, I can't hear you.
You mentioned your research, you mentioned your teaching. You also devoted enormous amount of time to administrative issues in both in Northwestern and here in Irvine. So now when you look back, which of those activities seems to be most valuable to you?
Oh, probably whatever I'm doing right now. I mean, people have asked me when I was in graduate school, they asked me, which courses do you like the best? And the answer always was each quarter, what I'm taking now, because I was learning new ideas, new concepts. Next quarter, I might find something better. And as far as universities are concerned, I'm a Finnish background, you know, the Lutheran faith, the ones that sit in those pews that, oh God, that keeps you awake because they're so horrible to sit in. And what did I do? My wife is also of a Finnish background. And then we discovered a fact. Contrary to what we grew up thinking, it is not a mortal sin to be comfortable. And so when Willie right here was recruiting me, yeah, that sounded pretty good. I can go down, instead of being up in Chicago where it's cold and windy, you think the wind here is something, you'd be up in Chicago. And down here where it's warm and sunny, oh, I love that. I love that trip. But actually, you gave a couple of things that I do. And the fact is that whatever I'm doing at the moment actually happens to be what I like the best. Lousy answer, but it's true. Willie? I agree.
It's very complicated to become a mathematician. Most people who get a PhD in mathematics spend the rest of their life working on mathematics. You're not the only mathematician who violates that rule, but you're certainly amongst a very small group. What led you to decide that you no longer wanted to use mathematics for the basic purposes that you'd learned in your math PhD and to use them in a larger terrain?
Well, good question. And the fact is that I do use mathematics, every single thing, every single advance that I've done. For example, we have the problem of the left side and right side of the brain. And I told simple stories about it, along with my colleague Louis Nairns. And what we were able to do is understand why that happens with a mathematical behavior. So I still do mathematics. It's still my first love. But, you know, what have been the advances of mathematics? It's when we find an issue in the sciences or elsewhere that straightforward mathematics does not answer. And so I became intrigued with that. How in the world am I going to find a way around it? And so I still do mathematics, but my motivation, the issues I look at, come from the physical sciences and the social sciences. And so I still stay in that role. Okay?
Great. So if there are no further questions, perhaps we can just thank Professor Saari one more time.
Thank you.